Last, I would like to introduce Coleen Rowley, who is a former FBI agent, an FBI whistleblower, and a committed activist in the peace and justice movement in the Twin Cities.
Hi. I'm going to say that this is what we've learned today is not only extremely creepy and it insults, every advocacy group, even more so than the anti-war groups. But it's also alarming to our democracy, and actually I will, at a third level, say it's counterproductive to law enforcement as a former FBI agent and a legal counsel who actually was in charge for 13 years of teaching the various civil liberties, the Bill of Rights, and most notably the First Amendment. The First Amendment, if you can believe this, was mandated by the FBI during my career to come first in my outline. They actually mandated, and it was because of the spies case where the FBI had made these mistakes in spies. So they mandated all legal counsels in the FBI to start their teaching of agents with the First Amendment. Now, unfortunately, after 9/11, some things began to happen. I've been speaking from an outline about like 6 or 7 of these factors that changed, and they changed quickly. One of the major things that changed quickly was the Attorney General Ashcroft at the time loosened the Attorney General guidelines that had existed since the 70s when the Church Committee found that the FBI was committing these COINTELPRO abuses, including black bag jobs and Martin Luther King, basically infiltrating anti-war groups at the time during Vietnam. And because it was so important, they made, and again, this did not prevent the FBI from going to find out about wrongdoing or violence. It didn't prevent, you'll hear this in the press, that at the time the FBI was prevented from going to a public meeting or learning about an act of violence. That's not true. The only thing the Attorney General guidelines did is it mandated a level of factual justification before you could actually get into this advocacy group. And it was not probable cause. People know about the level of probable cause that's needed to arrest somebody. The level was suspicion. Okay, so it was a much lower level, but at least it was something. After 9/11, Attorney General Ashcroft said you don't need any level of factual justification. And as these years have gone by, finally in 2008, when Bush was on his way out in December, he completely eradicated the former Attorney General guidelines. So that went on, and actually now all the FBI need do when they do send an infiltrator into a group is they have to deny, that's the standard now, they have to deny that they are targeting the group solely based on its First Amendment rights. Okay, that's pretty easy. Any legal commentator will tell you that denying that you're targeting a group solely based on their First Amendment rights is not a very high hurdle. In fact, it's no hurdle. And there's one person besides us saying this today. There is one other person in Washington, D.C. He's an official. He's a pretty high-level official. He's the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, Glenn Fine. And he has actually found now repeated instances, not just here in this case, but he's found the Thomas Merton Center in Pennsylvania, environmental groups, Greenpeace, all of these groups now have government spies that are insinuated into the groups. In fact, I will just say, now I'm going to go back to talking as a peace activist. This is the second case that I personally, now I'm a retired FBI agent, and I've personally been in groups now where there has been a government informant apparently reporting on me. It's like I would not have believed this actually even after 9/11 that this would result this way. The first time was in the Northfield Public Library, and this was in the planning for the protests before the Republican National Convention. The Northfield, and the title of the group that sponsored it is the Northfield People of Peace and Goodwill. The Northfield people of Peace and Goodwill opened up the public library room. There was about 30 people that came, mostly elderly people in Northfield. I was a speaker, Veterans for Peace was a speaker, but you know who else was in the room? In the back row, slouching behind a woman, because the detective who was on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force was slouching because he was afraid I would recognize him. And he was with another female detective. So of the 30 people in the room, you know, a good proportion were detectives. And you know, I think the detective now who has written a book about this thinks it's silly. He doesn't even understand why this went on. Now the second time was Karen Sullivan. The first time I spotted her was at a Code Pink organized event. They were actually Code Pink at the time in the early summer of 2008. They were planning to make these giant pink puppets, these giant puppets that you see at the May Day parade. And they had a meeting for this. About 30 some people came, again, small room, and I was sitting next to Karen Sullivan. And I think I even handed her our card, and I said, well, we're doing this bannering on 35W. It's very legal. You can have a nice sign that says support the troops and the war, and it's perfectly legal. And I invited her to come to help us with our bannering, and she actually came then 4 or 5 times. And then I thought, well, that's odd. She never showed up again. She came about 4 or 5 times. I'm racking my brain to remember what she told us at the time, but I just have a slight idea. The third thing I'm going to talk about here is about the counterproductiveness for law enforcement of what they're doing. And the shocking thing here is that my director, the FBI director Mueller, people don't recall, but after 9/11, he gave public speeches. And the reason he gave these public speeches to the ACLU, to different Muslim groups, is because there was a fear and a worry right after 9/11 that there would be this kind of overreaction. And I used to quote the FBI Director Mueller in my first speech. I quoted FBI Director Mueller because he was giving these assurances that this would never happen here in the United States. Mueller was actually found to have lied to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary. And this is just recently in connection with the Inspector General report. And it was because he didn't know this, but the FBI had infiltrated the Thomas Merton Center. And so when Mueller is being asked by Leahy, who was the chairman of the Judiciary, he says, no, of course not. The FBI has not done, when they attended this meeting, whatever it was because of, they thought there was a fugitive in the midst, or he said some reason. It turned out that was a complete misstatement on the part of Director Mueller. So we've gone from the situation where we had an FBI director giving assurances that this spying would never occur, now to a situation where the FBI director is caught in an outright lie to the Senate Judiciary. And I would say that if you actually were in the FBI, you would be very saddened and disappointed. I actually have some contact with retired agents who are quite disappointed because they see COINTELPRO without the safeguards. Without those safeguards, it's almost doomed to happen again. And it's not a good position to be in. If you're an FBI agent, do you want to get yourself into trouble as Deep Throat did and as these agents during the 70s did? I'm actually headed, and I'm going to mention, if anybody's interested, this op-ed, I have a shorter version of my paper that I'm negotiating to edit down with a major newspaper right now. I'm hoping that this op-ed would be published. The longer, more complete version that lists all of the factors that are counterproductive to law enforcement, I'll probably put it up online on the Huffington Post by Friday. And the reason I need to get it out now, even if the newspaper negotiation for the op-ed, whatever, is not able to get it down to the right word limit, then I'll still put out the long one. The reason is, Monday is Martin Luther King Day. And Martin Luther King Day in Washington, D.C. is going to be celebrated this year with a protest outside of the FBI. And it's this connection between the abuses that poor Martin Luther King was subject to. Martin Luther King had black bag jobs going on in his own hotel rooms. He was the subject of a vicious harassment that actually came from J. Edgar Hoover, anonymous letters, terrible things that went on. And unless we are able to somehow get a grip and get our sanity back and actually go back to finding the true terrorists, the true violence that we are seeing happen all over. You know, we're seeing these violent eruptions. Until we're able to do that, well, we need to constantly bring this up to the official FBI. I'll take questions, but...
Okay. Thank you. We'll take questions. First, I just want to say that the Committee to Stop FBI Repression is, is demanding a complete disclosure of all the peace and justice organizations that the FBI is or has been surveilling, investigating, or infiltrating, and an immediate end to this outrage that they are doing to our organizations and to our movement. We also want to note that before Christmas, the week before Christmas, numerous individuals and organizations came together in this very room to submit Freedom of Information Act requests to the FBI. Over 70 individuals, over 30 organizations from the Twin Cities have submitted these requests to find out what the FBI, what information they are gathering on anyone in the movement. We know that an injustice to one is probably an injustice to everyone. We know that these single attacks are not just one part of the whole attack that is being carried out. We don't see it as individualized, we see it as an attack on the movement as a whole. And so we are calling for the disclosure of those FOIA requests, that those be responded to as well. We will now take questions from the panelists, and I will facilitate that.
Who's gonna?
Can we see if there's media questions?
Oh, yes,
first?
sir.
Do you have the names of the new people who have been subpoenaed in Chicago?
Some of those names are on our website, stopfbi.net. Some people, everybody's working together, but some individuals have not chosen to be identified on our website and the materials. I don't know them or their names, mostly.
Oh, I'm wondering if if this Karen ever suggested anything illegal or tried to get you involved in doing something that was criminal.
That is something I will not be speaking about at this time,
Okay, thank you.
if that's all right. It's a good, brilliant question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can I mention one more thing? People have forgotten after 9/11, of course I have a familiarity with the whole situation of 9/11 and the changes that the problem before and then the changes that occurred afterwards. Well, one of the main suggestions that came out of the 9/11 Commission, in fact it was 3 of 41 recommendations, was for the creation of a quote-unquote Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. That was considered so important at the time because people actually were quite worried that this would be the result with the creation of Homeland Security, etc. And Bush, of course, at the time was dead set against it. He fought against it, but the Congress passed a law that mandated that he create this Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. So he was forced to create it. He had to pick 5 people. He picked 4 Republicans, 1 Democrat. And what happened with that thing is that eventually they resigned because they said the rug was pulled out from under the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. They were giving absolutely no ability to do what their assignment was to keep this in check. so that we actually do rightfully investigate wrongdoing when you have levels of justification, but don't go willy-nilly out there on every advocacy group that someone says they don't like. You know, so that was supposed to occur, but it didn't occur, and now Obama has let it die on the vine. And so again, you know, people have forgotten because it's a few years, but this was a big deal at the time, the Privacy and Civil Liberty Oversight Board. If we had one, we probably wouldn't be sitting here in this room today.
Okay. I want to thank everyone for coming, and I'm sure if you want to talk to the panelists individually afterwards or want individual interviews, we can make that happen. Thank you.